She told her supervisor there had been a death in the family. She packed her car, withdrew cash, bought alcohol, and drove straight into a February snowstorm. Hours later, her car was found crashed on a dark road in rural New Hampshire. A man stopped to help her. She refused. He left to call police. And in less than 10 minutes, she was gone. No footprints. No witnesses. Knows what happened to her. Not a single confirmed trace of her has ever been found. No body recovered. No confession ever made. No closure ever given. Just a locked and damaged car sitting on the side of a road, a scent trail that ends in the snow 100 yards from where she crashed, and a family that has spent over 20 years refusing to stop asking what happened to their daughter, their sister, their Maura. This is not a case that offers easy answers. This is not a case where the pieces fall neatly into place if you just look at them long enough. This is a case that has consumed investigators, haunted true crime communities, broken a father's heart in public over and over again, and left an entire nation wondering how a young woman can simply cease to exist on the side of a road in a matter of minutes. You are watching Cold Case, Solved Files, and tonight we are going all the way in. We are covering every detail, every theory, every unanswered question, and every painful revelation that has emerged in the years since Maura Murray walked away from her crashed Saturn and disappeared into the dark. If you are new to this channel, now is the time to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because Cold Case, Solved Files brings you exactly this kind of deep, unflinching, detail-rich storytelling on a regular basis, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Hit like if you are already locked in, drop a comment with what you already know about this case, and let us begin, because the story of Maura Murray is one that demands to be told in full. To understand the night Maura Murray disappeared, you cannot simply start with the car crash on New Hampshire Route 112. You have to go back further. You have to understand who she was, what her life looked like in the days before she vanished, and what was quietly unraveling beneath the surface of a young woman who, to the outside world, appeared to have everything moving in the right direction. Because the Maura Murray who packed her car on February 9, 2004 was not the same Maura Murray who had arrived at the University of Massachusetts Amherst full of promise and potential. Something had shifted. Something had broken. And the evidence of that breaking was scattered across the days and hours that preceded her disappearance like fragments of a story no one yet knew how to read. Maura was 21 years old. She was a nursing student at UMass Amherst, having previously attended the United States Military Academy at West Point before transferring. She had a boyfriend. She had a close and loving family. She had a future laid out in front of her. But she also had pressures and pains that those closest to her would only fully begin to articulate years after she was gone. Her sister Julie, who has since dedicated enormous energy to understanding and publicly discussing Maura's state of mind in her final days, has painted a picture of a young woman who carried a great deal quietly, who internalized stress in ways that were not always visible, and who had in the past struggled with an eating disorder that functioned, in Julie's words, as a mechanism of control during moments when everything else felt out of reach. And in the days just before she disappeared, everything did feel out of reach. One of the most significant emotional events in the lead-up to Maura's vanishing was the news that her sister Kathleen, who had battled alcohol addiction for some time, had relapsed. Maura learned about this relapse and was devastated. Her work supervisor later recalled that Maura had received an upsetting phone call and had needed to leave work early because of it. That call was about Kathleen. For Maura, who loved her family fiercely and who took on the emotional weight of those around her as her own burden, this was not simply sad news. It was destabilizing. It was the kind of news that knocks the ground from under you when you are already struggling to stay standing. And Maura was already struggling. 2 days before she disappeared, on February 7, 2004, her father Fred came to visit her at the university. It was the kind of visit that families take for granted, a parent making the trip to see their college kid, the two of them going shopping, sharing a meal, catching up the way parents and their grown children do when they manage to carve out time together. Maura dropped her father off at his motel room afterward and borrowed his car to attend a party on campus. It was an ordinary evening. It was the kind of evening that no one marks in their memory as significant until something happens to make it significant forever. At around 3:30 stakes. She was someone who turned them inward, who held herself to a standard that left little room for error, and who experienced failure with an intensity that others might not understand. The accident with her father's car hit her hard. She was distraught. She beat herself up. And that same night, in what Julie has identified as a telling behavioral signal, Maura had food delivered late at night. Julie, who understood her sister's relation, cash is anonymous. Cash cannot be tracked the way a card transaction can. She then made her way to a nearby liquor store, where she spent $40 on an assortment of drinks, Bailey's Irish Cream, vodka, and a box of wine. Whether she intended to drink alone, to share with someone at her destination, or whether the alcohol was something she turned to in those hours as a way of managing what was happening inside her, no one can say with certainty. Maura left the Amherst area somewhere between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. The route she is believed to have taken was Interstate 91 North, which would have carried her up through Vermont and toward the New Hampshire border. At 4:37 in the afternoon, her phone was used for the last time. She called to check her voicemail. That is the last known action Maura Murray ever took. After 4:37, there is nothing. The phone was never used again. Not a single call, outgoing or incoming, was ever recorded on that number after that moment. Maura Murray, as far as any digital or financial record is concerned, ceased to exist at 4:37 in the afternoon on February 9, 2004. What happened in the hours between 4:37 and just after 7 in the evening is unknown. She was driving. She was presumably on Interstate 91 and then on connecting roads through Vermont and into New Hampshire. The weather was poor. The roads were wintry. She was, according to the evidence at the scene that would be discovered later, drinking at some point during that drive. And then, on a curve in New Hampshire Route 112 in the small community of Haverhill, something went wrong. A woman who lived near that stretch of road heard what she described as a loud thumping sound coming from outside her home. When she looked out the window, she saw a vehicle pressed up against a snowbank alongside the road. The car had gone off near a sharp bend in the road and was now facing west on the eastbound side of the highway. The woman called the Grafton County Sheriff's Department at 7:27 in the evening to report what she had seen. In the narrow window between the accident and the arrival of law enforcement, something happened that has become the most critical and most debated element of this entire case. A passing motorist, driving along Route 112 that evening, came upon the accident scene. He pulled over. He approached the vehicle. He saw a young woman who he believed to be Maura walking around the car. She was not visibly injured. She was not bleeding. She showed no obvious signs of having just survived a serious impact. But she was cold. She was shivering. And when the motorist offered to help her, she declined. She was calm about it. She asked him specifically not to call the police. She told him that she had already contacted AAA and that assistance was on the way. The AAA organization would later confirm that they have no record of any such call being made that evening. The passing motorist, a decent man in an impossible position, had no phone service at the scene. He returned home to call the authorities. He was not comfortable leaving things as they were. He wanted someone to check on her. And so he made the call. Haverhill police arrived at the scene at approximately 7:46 in the evening. 19 minutes had passed since the resident had called the sheriff's department. Maura Murray was gone. Not injured nearby. Not walking along the road. Not sitting in the snow waiting for help. Gone. The officer who responded and the passing motorist who had spoken to her both drove the surrounding roads, searching for any sign of her. They found nothing. She had simply vanished into the cold New Hampshire night. What police found when they examined the Saturn told a story, but not a complete one. The tree she had collided with had struck the driver's side of the vehicle. The impact had damaged the left headlight and driven the radiator into the fan, rendering the car mechanically inoperable, at least according to the official police report. The windshield was cracked. Both airbags had deployed. The car had been left locked. Around and inside the vehicle, there were signs that alcohol had been consumed at the scene. Red stains resembling wine were visible. An empty beer bottle was found nearby. Among the items left behind in the car were Maura's favorite stuffed toy, diamond jewelry, her AAA card, the accident report forms believed to be related to the February 7 crash with her father's car, and written driving directions to Burlington, Vermont. The only items that were unaccounted for were her debit card, her credit card, her mobile phone, and several of the bottles of alcohol she had bought that afternoon. None of those items have ever been recovered. Not a single one. By 8:49 that evening, the Saturn had been towed to a nearby garage. And Maura was nowhere. There was one additional detail found at the scene that has never been satisfactorily explained. A rack from her emergency roadside kit had been stuffed into the muffler pipe of the car. Investigators have never publicly offered a definitive explanation for why that was the case. It is one of the small, strange details that make the Maura Murray case feel, even to seasoned investigators and researchers, like a puzzle with pieces missing from the box. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. By midday on February 10, Maura Murray was formally classified as a missing person. A report was issued calling on locals and law enforcement throughout the region to be alert for any sign of her. Fred Murray, Maura's father, was at work when the news reached him. He did not hear it from investigators. He heard it from Maura's sister. He immediately contacted the Haverhill investigators, who told him that if Maura had not turned up safe by the following morning, a search would be launched. She did not turn up. And so on the morning of February 11, search teams mobilized in the small community of Haverhill, New Hampshire, and began the painstaking work of looking for a missing 21-year-old woman in a winter landscape that offered very little shelter and very few answers. The first significant development from the search was both promising and deeply troubling. A scent dog picked up Maura's trail from the area of the crash site and followed it eastward, approximately 100 yards east of where her Saturn had been found. And then the trail ended. Just stopped. Vanished, the same way Maura had. Investigators interpreted this as suggesting that Maura had, at some point within that 100-yard stretch, gotten into another vehicle. Whether that vehicle belonged to someone she knew, someone she had called, someone she had arranged to meet, or a complete stranger who stopped along the road, no one could determine. The scent trail ending in the middle of the road is one of the central facts of this case, and it is one that supports multiple theories simultaneously while definitively confirming none of them. New Hampshire Fish and Game officers joined the expanding search effort, working through the terrain around the crash site. Nothing of immediate use was found. That afternoon, Maura's boyfriend and several family members arrived in Haverhill and were questioned extensively by investigators. It was during these interviews that Maura's boyfriend disclosed a detail that has haunted this case ever since. When he boarded his flight to New Hampshire, he switched his phone off. When the plane landed and he turned the phone back on, there was a voicemail waiting for him. He listened to it. What he heard was someone crying. Sobbing. He believed the voice was Maura's. The call had been placed using a calling card issued by the American Red Cross. That voicemail has never been definitively attributed to Maura Murray. Its origin has never been publicly confirmed. The calling card has never been fully traced. It is one of the most haunting unanswered questions in a case full of them, the possibility that even after she disappeared, even after the car was gone and the trail had ended, Maura Murray may have placed one last call to the person she loved. On February 12, Maura's classification was updated. She was now listed as endangered and possibly suicidal. This designation reflected the working theories of investigators at the time, who were leaning toward either a voluntary disappearance or a self-inflicted tragedy. Maura's family rejected this framing with consistency and conviction. They did not believe she had run away. They did not believe she had ended her own life. They knew her, they said. And this was not who she was. 10 days after she vanished, the Federal Bureau of Investigation formally joined the search effort, an indication of how seriously the case was being taken at a national level despite the lack of physical evidence. A second major search of the area around the crash site was organized, this time deploying scent dogs, cadaver dogs, and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging technology to survey the surrounding terrain from the air. The search was thorough. And it returned very little. During this second search, Maura's sister discovered a pair of torn underwear in the area. The item was immediately treated as potential evidence and submitted for DNA testing. The results, when they came back, confirmed that the underwear did not belong to Maura Murray. It was a painful cycle that would repeat itself multiple times across the years of this investigation, a discovery, a brief surge of hope or dread, and then a confirmation that led nowhere. In the months that followed the initial searches, the investigation entered the slow, grinding phase that characterizes so many missing persons cases once the initial urgency has passed and the evidence has run dry. The items recovered from inside Maura's Saturn were submitted for forensic analysis. The results, according to public reporting, were described as unremarkable. Nothing that offered a clear direction. Nothing that pointed to a specific person or a specific scenario. Additional searches of the surrounding area were carried out over the coming months and yielded no useful leads. The case began to cool. Then, in late 2004, something happened that injected new and dramatic energy into the investigation, though it would prove to be a highly contested development. A man approached Fred Murray directly and handed him a knife. The man's claim was extraordinary. He alleged that the knife had been used in Maura Murray's killing. He told Fred that his own brother, a man with a documented criminal history who lived approximately 1 mile from the crash site, had been behaving strangely in the weeks following Maura's disappearance. The brother's girlfriend had also been acting unusually, the man claimed. And shortly after this encounter with Fred, the brother allegedly had his Volvo scrapped, disposing of the vehicle in a way that could have removed potential physical evidence. The story, if true, was significant. The story, if true, changed everything. But the story faced an immediate and serious challenge. Members of the man's own family came forward and stated that he had invented the entire account. Their explanation was that he had fabricated the story in order to collect the reward money that had been posted in connection with Maura's disappearance. They cited his history of substance abuse as context for understanding his behavior. Law enforcement was left in the uncomfortable position of trying to evaluate a claim that its own sources' relatives were publicly calling a lie. And for a time, it seemed as though the tip would simply fade into the background noise of a case that had already generated more than its share of dead ends. Except that in October of 2006, something happened that gave those allegations a deeply unsettling second life. A group of volunteers conducting a search effort in the Haverhill area brought cadaver dogs to a property located approximately 1 mile from the crash site. The dogs alerted to a specific area on the property. An alert from a cadaver dog is not proof of anything. But it is not nothing either. It is a trained animal signaling the possible presence of human remains, and it is the kind of signal that responsible investigators cannot simply walk away from. What made the alert even more significant was the fact that the house in question had previously been owned by the very brother of the man who had brought the knife to Fred Murray 2 years earlier. A sample of carpet from inside the home was taken and submitted for forensic testing. And the results of that testing have never been made public. To this day, whatever the forensic analysis of that carpet revealed, if anything, has not been disclosed. It is another sealed room in a house full of sealed rooms. Fred Murray did not slow down. He never slowed down. If anything, the years seemed to sharpen rather than diminish his determination to find out what happened to his daughter. He pursued legal action against law enforcement in order to gain access to case files that he and his family believed should be available to them. He appeared on national television programs, talk shows, news networks, documentary productions, every time he was given a platform to speak about Maura. He reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to elected officials, to anyone in a position of influence who might be moved to direct more resources toward finding his daughter. Together with Maura's siblings and other family members, he helped create and maintain a dedicated website at mauramurraymissing.org, which serves as both a public record of the case and a standing invitation for anyone with information to come forward. Fred Murray is not a man who accepted the silence. He refused it at every turn. And while his efforts have not yet produced the answer he has been searching for, they have kept Maura's story alive in the public consciousness in a way that has proven, time and again, to matter in missing persons cases. In 2014, investigators made a public statement that was, in its own grim way, significant. They acknowledged that in the 10 years since Maura Murray had vanished from New Hampshire Route 112, there had not been a single credible reported sighting of her anywhere. Not one. A decade of nothing. Of no trace, no contact, no confirmed evidence that she was out there living a life somewhere under a different name or in a different city. Her bank accounts had not been accessed. Not a single transaction had been recorded since the night she disappeared. This financial silence is something investigators and criminologists have returned to repeatedly when analyzing this case. People who choose to disappear and rebuild their lives elsewhere need money eventually. They access accounts. They find ways to survive that leave traces. Maura Murray left no traces. Her accounts sat untouched for a decade and continued to sit untouched in the years beyond that. For many people who have studied this case carefully, and for Fred Murray himself, the complete absence of any financial activity is among the strongest evidence that Maura did not survive. Fred has said this without hesitation and without softening the edges of the statement. He believes his daughter is dead. He believes she was abducted on the night of February 9, 2004, on that stretch of Route 112, in the minutes between the passing motorist walking away and the police arriving. He believes someone took her. And he believes that person has never been held accountable. He has lived with that belief and that grief for more than 20 years, and he has never stopped demanding that someone, somewhere, answer for what he believes was done to his child. In 2019, an excavation was carried out in the basement of the house where cadaver dogs had alerted 13 years earlier. The timing of this excavation was tied directly to a change in ownership of the property. The previous owners had refused to allow any search of the premises, a refusal that Fred Murray and his family had found deeply frustrating and that had, understandably, done nothing to diminish suspicion surrounding the property. When the house changed hands, the new owners took a different position. They agreed to allow investigators access. They cooperated. And so, more than 15 years after the original cadaver dog alerts, the basement was finally excavated. No physical evidence was recovered. No remains. No objects of significance. The basement offered no confirmation of the darkest theory surrounding that property. But the absence of evidence is not the same as exoneration, and the questions surrounding that house have never been fully put to rest in the minds of those who have followed this case most closely. 2021 brought with it one of the most painful episodes in the long history of this investigation. Bone fragments were discovered on Loon Mountain in Lincoln, New Hampshire. Loon Mountain sits approximately 25 miles from the location where Maura was last seen. The discovery was significant not only because of the proximity to the case's geography, but because Maura's family confirmed that she had visited Loon Mountain before and was familiar with the area. The news traveled quickly and widely. In true crime communities that had followed this case for nearly 2 decades, and in the broader public, there was a surge of attention and, for many people, a complicated and painful kind of hope. Not hope that the news would be good, because the discovery of remains cannot be good news. But hope, perhaps, for resolution. For an end to the not knowing that has defined this case for so long. Months passed while forensic analysis was conducted. And then the announcement came. The remains did not belong to Maura Murray. Once again, the case had reached out and pulled people toward an answer, only to snatch it away before it could be grasped. In 2024, Maura's sister Julie took a step that, in many ways, represents the most intimate and sustained examination of this case since the investigation began. She launched a podcast called The Untold Story of Maura Murray. In it, Julie does not simply rehash the facts of the disappearance. She explores who her sister was as a person, her struggles, her joys, her vulnerabilities, the texture of her inner life in the weeks and days before she was last seen. The podcast has been both deeply personal and genuinely revelatory, adding new layers to a case that many people thought they already knew comprehensively. Among the most significant things Julie has discussed publicly is her fundamental challenge to one of the core factual claims in the official police record. The police report from the night of the accident stated clearly and definitively that Maura's Saturn was mechanically inoperable after striking the tree on Route 112. The damage was described as severe enough that the vehicle could not have been driven. But Julie commissioned an independent analysis of the car by a private vehicle reconstructionist, and that expert reached a conclusion that directly contradicts the official account. According to the reconstructionist, the damage to the Saturn was not consistent with the car having struck a tree in the manner described by police. The car was, the expert concluded, drivable. Furthermore, the reconstructionist determined that the damage appeared to have been caused while the vehicle was in motion rather than while it was stationary. These are not minor discrepancies. If the car was drivable, the entire dynamic of that night changes. If the damage pattern does not match the official description of what happened, then questions arise about what actually caused that damage and when. Julie also disclosed a detail from the forensic examination of the car that she believes has not received adequate attention. A car part manufactured by Chrysler was found inside the Saturn. Julie noted, pointedly, that Chrysler is the manufacturer of Jeep vehicles. This matters because of a separate reported observation made around the time of the accident. A Jeep Grand Cherokee was reportedly sighted approximately 7 miles from the crash scene, and the vehicle drove away when police arrived at the area. Additionally, a white scuff mark was found on the rear bumper of Maura's Saturn. Julie does not present these details as proof of anything specific. But she presents them as a cluster of observations that, taken together, deserve serious investigative attention and have never, in her view, received it. Julie's criticisms of the investigation itself are direct and extensive. She has stated that several people who were among the last to have contact with Maura, who spoke to her or saw her in the hours before she vanished, were never subjected to thorough interviews by investigators. She has described a handwritten note found inside Maura's car that contained a phone number and a physical address. She believes this note was never properly followed up on by law enforcement. When Julie herself called the number written on that note, she reached a person who expressed complete surprise at being told they were connected to a high-profile missing persons case. That detail speaks to a failure of basic investigative thoroughness that Julie finds unconscionable. She has also argued that investigators may have failed to properly search the area east of the crash site, the direction in which Maura had been traveling, and that potential evidence may have been missed as a result. The Murray family's relationship with law enforcement over the course of this investigation has been shaped by these frustrations. It has not been a comfortable or collaborative relationship in the traditional sense. But the family's willingness to push, to demand, to challenge official accounts publicly and persistently has ensured that the Maura Murray case has never been quietly filed away and forgotten. It remains active. It remains discussed. And with every year that passes, the circle of people who know her name and care about finding answers only grows. In the early period of the investigation, before the search had broadened and the theories had multiplied, some investigators and observers began to notice a possible connection between Maura's disappearance and another case that was developing around the same time. 17-year-old Brianna Maitland was a waitress who vanished in March of 2004 while making her way home from work one evening. She was last seen in Montgomery, Vermont, approximately 90 miles from Haverhill, New Hampshire. The surface similarities between the two cases were striking enough to generate genuine speculation. Both Maura and Brianna were young white women with brunette hair who disappeared within weeks of each other in the same general region of northern New England. And in both cases, the missing woman's car was left behind at the scene of her disappearance. Brianna's vehicle was found backed up against an old abandoned farmhouse with her personal belongings still inside, echoing the quality of abandonment that characterized the scene on Route 112. The parallels were enough that a possible common perpetrator was theorized. However, the Federal Bureau of Investigation conducted a review of both cases and concluded that they were not connected. Two young women. Two separate investigations. Two families without answers. That much, at least, they share. Maura Murray remains missing. She was 21 years old when she was last seen standing beside her crashed black Saturn on New Hampshire Route 112 in the small community of Haverhill, New Hampshire, on the night of February 9, 2004. She is described as a white female with brown hair and brown eyes. She stood 5 feet and 7 inches tall and weighed approximately 120 pounds at the time of her disappearance. More than 20 years have now passed since that night. Her bank accounts have never been touched. No confirmed physical trace of her has ever been recovered. No credible sighting of her has been reported in over a decade. A father has spent more than 2 decades publicly grieving and publicly demanding answers for his daughter. A sister has built a podcast, a platform, an ongoing act of love and advocacy, around keeping Maura's memory alive and the pressure on. A family has never stopped. And a case has never been solved. If you have any information that may be relevant to the disappearance of Maura Murray, please contact your nearest FBI field office or submit an anonymous tip online at tips.fbi.gov/home. This case remains open. The family is still out there. And Maura Murray deserves to be found. She deserved more than a crash on an empty road and a darkness that swallowed her whole. She deserved the life that was still ahead of her. And until someone, somewhere, decides to tell what they know, that is exactly what was taken from her. If this story has moved you, if it has stayed with you the way cases like this one tend to stay with the people who truly pay attention, then please do something with that. Share this video right now and put it in front of someone who has never heard the name Maura Murray, because in missing persons cases, awareness is not symbolic. It is functional. It is the mechanism by which cold cases get solved, because someone who watched a video like this one remembers a detail, or knows someone who does, or is finally moved to speak after years of staying silent. Subscribe to Cold Case, Solved Files if you are not already here, because this is what we do on this channel. We go deep. We stay with the difficult cases. We do not let the silence win. And drop a comment below right now with your thoughts, your theories, the questions this case leaves you with, because this community is part of how these stories stay alive. Maura Murray's story is not over. Not until she is found. And Cold Case, Solved Files will keep telling it until she is.